Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be talking about most hunters' favorite time to be in the woods, the rut. And the reason that it's most hunters' favorite time to be hunting is because you just never know when that local giant could walk by your stand. During the rut, the bucks are moving a lot during daylight, but in order to get an opportunity at one, just like with the pre-rut, we need to know what the bucks are doing and why. And that's one of the nice things about the rut. These bucks, for the most part, only have one thing on their mind: breeding does. And that's the first thing that I wanted to talk about in this video, is that during the rut, you need to place a high priority on being where those doe family groups are. Again, a buck's only mission during the rut is finding and breeding those hot does. So if you can get in close to those doe family groups, then you have a really good chance of having encounters with your local bucks. And there are a few stand locations that you guys should be focusing on to getting close to these doe family groups. In the morning, we really like to be on the downwind edge of those thick bedding areas or in between different doe bedding areas. In the afternoon, we really like to hunt on the downwind side of these trails leading from bedding to the afternoon food source. Not necessarily a destination food source, but kind of their pass-through food source before they get to that destination food source. With these different stand locations, what you're trying to capitalize on is buck movement as they're searching for that next hot doe. And again, in the morning, we really like to be on the downwind edge of those known bedding areas. So when the bucks start to work that thick cover on the downwind side to scent check that bedding area, we're there waiting to hopefully get an opportunity as he sneaks by. Another great morning stand location that we just mentioned was in between two known bedding areas. If you can find a natural or a man-made pinch point in between two known bedding areas, this is a great place to set up during the rut. Once a buck is done breeding a doe, he is immediately going to start searching for the next one. And if there are no more hot does in the bedding area that he's currently in, he's going to leave that bedding area and move on to the next one, and then the next one until he finds the next doe in estrus. So by setting up in between two known bedding areas, hopefully on some sort of a pinch point to consolidate the deer movement, you have a great opportunity to catch bucks as they're moving from bedding area to bedding area, as well as having opportunities at bucks as they're tending does. When a buck is tending a doe, he's going to try his best to keep her in that thick security cover, but that doesn't always happen. Every once in a while, she's going to leave to go either to another bedding area, go to a food source, and that buck is not going to leave her side. He's going to follow her. So if she moves from one bedding area to another, again, he's not going to leave her side. And if you're able to set up in between those two locations, you have a higher probability of having an opportunity at that buck. As far as what stand locations we like to hunt during the afternoon or evening sits, this really doesn't differ much from the pre-rut. We really like to be on the downwind side of those known trails leading from bedding to an afternoon food source. And the thought process is the same. We want to give ourselves a good opportunity at being where those bucks are, and those bucks know that those does are moving from the bedding areas to the food source in the evening. So they're either going to be working the cover along the downwind edge of those afternoon food sources, or they're going to be tending a doe and she's going to lead him right to the afternoon food source. So by placing yourself in between the thick bedding cover and the afternoon food source, you're increasing your chances of having an encounter with one of the local bucks as they're searching for or tending to receptive does. The second thing that I wanted to talk about as it relates to hunting the rut is how these bucks are getting from point A to point B. And that could be a bedding area to a bedding area, that could be a bedding area to a food source, but these bucks are very methodical as they move from location to location. And we actually just went over this in last week's video on hunting the pre-rut. If you guys did miss that video, I will link it above. But again, what you want to try to be focusing on is either where deer movement is being pinched down or consolidated, or maybe you have a section of really thick, nasty cover where a deer can sneak from one side of your property to the other. Older bucks here in Michigan do make some decisions that they wouldn't otherwise be making, especially if they're tending to a doe. But for the most part, these older bucks, I don't normally see them walking through open hardwoods, walking through open fields, getting from point A to point B. These older bucks are still using that thick cover when it's available, even if that means they're walking twice as far. They'd much rather stay safe in the thick cover than expose themselves in an open field or the open hardwoods. So that's why you really want to focus on these habitat features, whether that's a natural or man-made pinch point, inside corners, if you have some sort of connecting cover from one woodlot to another, as these bucks are moving from one location to another, searching for that next hot doe, if you place your stand on the downwind side of where this deer movement is consolidated, you have a really good chance of seeing those bucks as they try to sneak by. The next thing I want to talk about is when should you be hunting during the rut. And normally we like to tie our hunts to cold fronts. So when the temperature drops, barometric pressure rises, wind slows down, that's when we're going in to hunt. But during the rut, that's a little bit different. Whether it's really cold, whether it's really hot, whether it's really windy, whether it's really rainy, during the rut, these bucks are going to be on their feet searching for does. Now you are going to see more daylight activity when it's cooler and especially after a major temperature drop. But again, because during the rut, there's a good chance that an older buck could walk by your stand at any time, we like to be in the woods as much as we can. Now, I can already see the negative comments coming in that you should only be hunting a cold front and that hunting those low odds days is only going to ruin and overpressure your property. And so let me just clarify that while we are hunting at any chance that we get during the rut, on those low odds days, we are not pushing into our better stand locations. We are still saving our best bedding area or best pinch point stand locations for those major temperature drops immediately following a cold front. However, every property is going to have several stands right on the property line where there's major travel on and off the property. So let's say you have a very low odds day, maybe it's 75, 80 degrees like it was last year in early November. Don't push into your property, sit one of those edge stands, sit one of those observation stands, but if you have time off, make sure that you're in the woods because you have no idea what can happen during the rut. Again, last year in early November, it was 75 degrees, so we did hunt, but again, we were hunting close to our cabin, close to the roads, more observational sits, giving ourselves a chance while not pushing far into our property. But after pulling and reviewing trail camera cards a few weeks later, we still had a few nice bucks running around chasing does in the middle of the day when it was 75 degrees. And by trying to be in the woods as much as you can brings me to the next thing that I want to talk about in this video, and that's all-day sits. Now, these all-day sits, these are the hunts that we're waiting for that cold front to move through. We're waiting for a significant temperature drop before we start pushing in to our best stand locations. And I do have a few tips for you guys if you do want to try an all-day sit this season. And the first one is to be comfortable. And in order to be comfortable during an all-day sit, you do have to do a few different things. The first one is to make sure that you are in a comfortable stand. You're not going to make it very long sitting in an uncomfortable tree stand, whether that's a really small seat or maybe you have a big knot right in your back from the tree that's just bulging out right into your back, or maybe the tree is leaning forward, so you're constantly leaning forward. Your back is going to get really sore really fast, and you're just not going to make it very long. So just make sure that you're sitting in a comfortable stand if you're trying an all-day sit. The next thing as it relates to comfort is just to make sure that you dress warm. I don't know what would get you out of the stand faster, an uncomfortable tree or freezing your butt off. So, but either one of those things is going to cause you to get down sooner than what you want to. And finally, in order to stay comfortable for the entire all-day sit, make sure that you bring enough to eat and you bring enough to drink. If you're used to getting down at a certain time and hitting breakfast, but you don't during an all-day sit attempt, well, your stomach's going to definitely let you know. And if you're sitting in your tree really hungry, that's just one more thing that could tempt you to get down or distract you when that older buck walks by. Another thing that I wanted to mention, since we are talking about all-day sits, is that most all-day sits are hunted from two different stands. Just like we talked about earlier in the video, in the morning you want to be hunting on the downwind edge of doe bedding or in between different bedding areas, and in the afternoon you want to transition to the afternoon food source or the trail in between the bedding areas and the food source. So that's just one more thing to keep in mind if you are planning an all-day sit this season. The next thing I want to talk about as it relates to hunting the rut is calling. Whether that's with your grunt call, maybe busting out your rattling antlers, taking out your doe can. Everyone loves the idea of calling in a monster buck that would have otherwise walked by. And our approach to calling isn't much different than a lot of our other hunting tactics in that it's very conservative. I don't really do much blind calling, and I don't even bring rattling antlers into the tree with me. And the reason is simple. Here in Michigan, the deer are very pressured, and if bucks were ever going to come into a rattling sequence, that buck is most likely already dead. I'm not going to say that you're never going to be able to blind call in or rattle in an older buck, but again, here in Michigan, these bucks did not get old by making that mistake. A lot of hunters here in Michigan will try to blind call or rattle in a buck, and again, the bucks that come into that are most likely already dead. Just to give you guys a quick example of this, last year during the rut, I was sitting back near one of our bedding areas and my neighbor was hunting about 400 yards away on a field edge. I didn't know he was hunting at the time, but out of nowhere, I thought I heard two Boone and Crockett bucks fighting to the death about 400 yards away in my neighbor's field. Not long after that, only a few minutes later, one of the 2-year-old bucks that was using our property last year left a bedding area close to where that rattling was coming from, walked by my stand and went off to a different bedding area on the other side of the property. And this particular buck was an aggressive deer, and even he did not want anything to do with that rattling sequence. Now that does not mean that you should never call, and I think it's important that each one of you carries a grunt call into the woods with you every time that you hunt. And that's because if you ever see a buck moving in another direction, or maybe you see a buck on a doe, again, moving in another direction, and you want to try to get their attention to bring them closer to your stand to have an opportunity, you need to have some sort of a call to get their attention to bring them closer. When this eventually happens, and it happens every single season, you see a buck off in the distance and he's moving in the other direction, you don't think you're gonna get an opportunity, I like to hit him with a contact grunt. If he does not respond, then I will try another contact grunt just to make sure that he hears it. If he doesn't respond after a second contact grunt, then I'm done calling. It's not worth spooking that deer. If you're in a good location, there's a decent chance that that buck could loop around and come back in 20 minutes anyways. So again, my approach to calling during the rut in high pressure areas like Michigan is less is more. Don't push your bucks off to your neighbors by over-calling or trying an over-aggressive rattling sequence. And to wrap up this year's video on hunting the rut, I do have a bonus tip for you. Last year, our bonus tip was to, if you can, hunt Halloween. And because for whatever reason on Halloween, there seems to be deer running everywhere. That must be the starting gun to the rut, and everyone is just kind of off to the races on that day. But this year's bonus tip for hunting during the rut is to try your best to stay off your phones. And I know that hunting isn't always the most exciting thing to do. We spend a lot of mornings and evenings in the tree, sometimes going hours without seeing anything but squirrels. And I get that being on your phone makes time in between sightings go by a lot faster. However, during the rut, and really this isn't just during the rut, it just happens more often during the rut, things can happen really fast, and if you're not ready, you can miss your opportunity. We try our best to not only share the tips and strategies that have worked for us in the past, but also share the mistakes that we've made as well. And last year we had a potential opportunity at one of our target deer, but unfortunately as that buck was moving into a food plot to either check for does or work a scrape, the hunter that was sitting along the edge of that food plot was on his phone, and as he looked up from the phone, that movement kind of caught that deer's attention. That deer decided he did not want to go into that food plot anymore and just kind of kept moving through, and we never saw him again. That was one of those 75-degree days in November last year, right in the middle of the rut, where you don't really think a lot's going to happen because it's so warm. On those types of days where you don't really expect a lot to happen, or maybe you're sitting in an all-day stand and you're not seeing much, that phone is very tempting, but try your best to resist the temptation and stay focused and present in the deer woods. But guys, that pretty much wraps it up on today's video on hunting the rut. If you guys have any additional tips on how to hunt the rut, or if you guys have any questions, please drop those in the comment section below. I'll get back to those as soon as I can, and we will see you guys in the next video.